Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Global Industry Spotlight. Every Thursday, we talk to different people in the creative industries. We focus locally, nationally, and internationally. It's been really exciting talking to some people from different countries in the previous weeks, kind of learning about their ecosystems, learning about the creative industries, what kind of resources are being developed, and how the industry is shaping up. My name is Daniel Crane. I'm the program director for the Center for Creative Entrepreneurship. We focus on providing business resources, educational resources for creative entrepreneurs. Please go to our website at cceglobal.org. We have lots of interesting events happening every week. We aggregate different workshops and boot camps from our partners. We create our own programming, and we're working on developing an academy for creative entrepreneurs to learn, and then a career marketplace where you can find jobs. So it's really important for us to provide tools for the entrepreneur that that they can use. How do you make money? How do you build a career? How do you grow as you're working on your craft? I'm really excited about our conversation today. I talked with Daphne Laura a couple weeks ago. She was formerly with Choose Paris Region. We had a great conversation about, just the French market in general, the creative industries. What are some of the things that are happening in France? What are happening in Paris? I think she recently was living in New York, so she kind of really knows how businesses move back and forth. So I'm really excited to talk to her today. So let's bring her into the conversation. Hi, Daphne. How are you doing?
Hello, thanks Daniel. Thanks for having me today.
Yeah, definitely. I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to us today. And as I was saying to our listeners that, I enjoyed our conversation a couple weeks ago, learning about the work that you're doing. And I think to kind of get everything started, can you just talk a little bit about yourself, your background, and the work that you're doing?
Yeah, absolutely. So I come from the creative industries myself. I started my career in TV production in France. I worked in production companies for TV shows for 7 years before I moved to the US. And then I worked for the Tribeca Film Institute, so supporting creative from all over the world in interactive production. And then I worked for the cultural services of the French Embassy, and I was running a program for creative industry startups coming from France to the US. I did that for 2 years. And the past 4 years, I worked for Choose Paris Region, which is the economic development agency of the Paris region, helping North American companies coming to France and also creative companies from all over the world expanding to France and to Paris region, so helping them understand the local ecosystem, connecting with key players, advising them on their go-to-market strategy, and helping them in their really setup, like opening a French entity. And so I just recently moved back to Paris, as you mentioned. So I'm actually at Station F, one of the biggest startup campus here in Paris.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's wonderful. Can you talk a little bit about, just the term creative industry and what that means in France, and when you explain to someone, I work in the creative industries, how do you explain it to them?
Yeah, that's actually a very good question, because different countries have different understanding of that term.
Yeah, absolutely.
So in France, it encompasses 10 sectors. So we have cinema, audiovisual, music, live performances, video games, visual arts, the press and publishing, radio, advertising, and marketing. So for example, we have not the fashion industry and not the food industry, which is sometimes part of the creative industries. And to give you a number, in France, the total revenue for these 10 sectors was more than 90 billion euros in 2018, which is the equivalent of the food industry in France. So it's a very important sector for France.
Yeah. And That's it. I always am impressed when people remember lists of 10 things. You know, when people ask you like what sectors are you, you're like, okay, it's this, it's this. You know, uh, you know, in terms of now, okay, so now we have these 10 sectors that are organized as the creative industries in France, and you know, you were in charge of building. Create or helping creative entrepreneurs build their businesses, correct? And also move them across seas to different places. Can
Yeah.
you talk a little bit about, you know, the type of companies that you worked with, and you know where you saw people having success?
Yeah, so we were mostly working with companies in the audiovisual sectors, like TV, movie production, VFX companies as well, because we have a lot of talent in these sectors in France and in Paris region in particular. And we have also very interesting tax rebate for production, so it drove a lot of interest from international companies. Same in video games. We have in France a tax credit for video game productions, and so we supported a lot of companies from the US, but also from Europe, opening new offices in Paris. So that was the main focus we had, and then you have a lot of advertising agencies. They require less of our services, but Paris is one of the capital of advertising, London and New York, so we saw a lot of companies expanding there. And it's of course subsector of the creative industries where you have more money, so it's might be easier for company to grow and expand than in the visual arts, that are usually more
Right.
local companies.
Yeah. Okay. And then in terms of bringing companies to Paris or to France, inviting them to, you know, set up businesses there. What is the French market in general in the creative industries interested in? Like, are there specific things or businesses that you want to attract, or that the government is interested in attracting?
Yeah, well, the one that I just mentioned were also our priority in targeting and reaching to.
Right.
Uh, because we have a lot of both creative and tech talents when we talk about VFX and video games. We have a lot of very good schools, renowned schools, and you can find a lot of French creative people actually in other countries, like in Canada, when we share a language for part of Canada, so you see a lot of French talent moving
Right,
over
going to Canada.
there.
Mm-hmm.
So when you talk about animation, 3D, we have a school named Les Gobelins, which is one of the best school in the world. So we have all this pool of talent, and this is what we try attracting also companies like looking to tap into this pool of talent that we have in France.
Right, and then in terms of this talent and people building businesses in France, right? So if someone comes to you and says, "Hey, I want to start a business," or I have a business and it's 1 to 5 people and it's this amount of income, or I'm making this, but I want to expand to a different country. How do you advise them to do that?
Yeah. So you don't have to do it alone. So you have people like us and other organizations to help you. And the first thing is to map out, I think, the ecosystem and understand how it works. And so you have a lot of companies like business clusters that will gather, big corporate companies, startup R&D centers, schools, and that are specialized in some of the, sectors. So it's a good idea to start connecting with them. For example, in France, we have one for all audiovisual and augmented reality, virtual reality, called Cap Digital. We have one that will be more specialized in gaming, called Capital Games. So really gathering all the producer and distributor in the video game industry in the Paris region. And all these organizations, they do organize, their own events, the work of connecting. So this is what I used to do, is advise and connect people with other connectors in the ecosystem, and then of course advising them of events where they might want to go to, because it's a good way to connect with the local or international ecosystem. And we are very lucky that in France and in Paris in particular, we have a lot of international events around creative industries. So you have actually in the fall season, you have 2 events coming up around music, and they have specific, conferences and workshops to help entrepreneurs in the music sphere to connect with each other and talk about specific things for them. For French entrepreneurs, and I think it would be more your crowd, but in France, we have a World 3-day events coming up next week called Entrepreneurship in Culture. And this is a great way also to understand how to set up your business in France, all the funding that you might get, because I just mentioned some of the biggest ones, but you have a lot of national support in France for the creative and cultural industry in general. So that will be that, advising that. And also we have a lot of call for application for projects. Some might be open only to French or European companies, but you have to know that even if you're an American company and when you expand to France and you set up your French entity, you become French in a way, so you have access to all of these opportunities and funding. And so that was my role to let people know about all the opportunities that exist in France and Paris region. And this is why I launched a year and a half ago a newsletter called Creative Paris Region. And so it will continue, Choose Paris Region will continue this newsletter. So I really encourage the audience to subscribe, because it's really in English. It's done for an international public to know what's going on, in France and Paris in terms of news and regulation and all of that, but also events, opportunities, corporates, etc.
And that's the website is chooseparisregion.org, right? If they want to sign up for the newsletter. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. I also like, that's a great point too, that, if you set up your business in France or in Paris, you're considered a French business, so you have access to all of these, potential resources that you're talking about. That's a great point. What excites you, in the creative industries? What is your kind of personal, passion for, I think I remember you saying when we had a conversation, metadata.
Metaverse, yeah.
Metaverse. Yeah, so I'd love for you to talk a little bit about that, and what you see that as being the, the future, and what excites you about, metaverse.
Yes, that's a topic that really interests me, what's going on in the metaverse space. So the creation of meta universe online linked to video games and everything that is happening, or where during the COVID-19 all events went online and went into the video games. You had this whole series of concerts there, or fashion shows. And what's interesting is all the products that are developed around that. Now you see, fashion creation sold via NFTs, and that only exist in the virtual world. And so I find that fascinating, as well as, avatar and all the questions that will arise when everybody will have his or her avatar online and who owns the right of the avatar. So there's a lot of questions around that. But that being said, it's not what really is happening in France, because it's mostly in the US. So maybe since we're talking also about France today, to give you maybe an example of what's really interesting in what's happening in France today, and that's also something I'm looking at right now, is sustainability in the creative industries. Yeah. It's a big topic, I guess, for everybody. But to give you a concrete example, there was a lot of discussion recently about sustainability in audiovisual production, and so how you can make a production more efficient in terms of energy, reduction of waste. And one of the initiatives that I find really, really interesting is called La Ressourcerie du Cinéma. So it's a recycling center for cinema and audiovisual production. And when they get all the film sets that have been used, or the material that has been barely used or not used at all, and they gather all that in one location, and they can actually, rent or sold to other professionals or individuals that want to, take this window for their own house and stuff. And so it doesn't end up, in the garbage, because it has only like a 1 to 3 months live shelf, say, when
Right.
we're
Right.
shooting a movie. And so they're doing that. They're also doing training to train professionals about how to think about, a responsible way to do shooting films. And they have this display of different materials that you can use. And it's based in the north of Paris, and I find that very interesting. And of course, it has linked to also the event industry, because they use a lot also of sets and decors, and the fashion industry as well for the fashion shows. And so you've seen that, across these industries, this discussion taking place right now, and a lot of initiative on that. And I find that really interesting.
Yeah. So I think, when you were in New York, I don't know if that was happening, but that's not really happening here in Chicago. I would say that a lot of the time Europe is ahead of us in the sustainability game. Because when I talked to my guests last week, also they were focusing on sustainability in the creative industries, which I think is really wonderful and important. The fact that you build these massive TV sets or film sets, and they all get, everything kind of gets trashed. How can we, build them in a sustainable way? I mean, we have companies, I know of here in Chicago that take like old houses, and they take the raw materials, and then you can go to a warehouse and buy them to repurpose for a project that you're having. But I have not heard of, companies or event companies even offering, like, we do things in a sustainable way, which I think eventually will happen, but it's something that is not here yet. But I know that it's I think for consumers, especially younger consumers as well, the sustainability part is very important.
Yeah. And I absolutely agree with you. This is more, Europe is more focused on social climate impact. I mean, climate change is more relevant for Europe than for Americans. And I remember a couple of years ago, I was working with a delegation of French entrepreneurs, all sectors, coming to New York. And they were really surprised that the theme of sustainability was not present in the conversation they were having with different players of the ecosystem. So you can really see a difference in approaching our two countries there.
Yeah, and I mean, I think, though, there's a great opportunity. I mean, for just how food here became, organic, and everyone wanted to know what the ingredients were, and, that there was a huge shift that happened. I think that shift will happen eventually, and we just kind of need some trailblazers and some, companies to get it started. And I can imagine, it would immediately, there would be some sort of stamp of, we do business sustainably, and people would get hired, because there's I think for a lot of industries here, sustainability usually means more money, right? Or even the consumer thinks, well, if I have to pay for it to be sustainable, I have to pay more money for it. So it's like, what kind of incentives can we, does the government give or whatever for, the industry to think like that? I think if you have, offline, if you have anything that is, please email it to me. I would be curious to see how that looks, in action.
Absolutely.
So, okay.
I can send you guys in English, so you will be able to show the audience as well, share best practice, and maybe we'll start a conversation. Some of your companies and French companies, and always happy to connect if there is, a connection.
Yeah, I think I honestly think there's a huge opportunity here for exactly what you're talking about, because it doesn't exist, as far as I know. Definitely not in Chicago. Well, great. Well, Daphne, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us today. Was there anything else that that you're working on or that you see happening that you're excited about besides the sustainability?
Yes, so in terms of what's happening, to give you maybe a bit more about what's happening in France, what's interesting is also the rise of podcasts, but less than the US though, but we're getting here.
Mm,
So the number of people listening to podcasts in France has doubled between 2019 and 2020, and we see a lot of more production companies of podcasts. But I know that eyes are really turned on the US because the US are really masters in storytelling, and so there's a lot of inspiration from how to do podcasts. That French people are getting from the US. But we've seen a lot of new production companies there, and still thinking about business models. But it's really interesting to see what's happening. And you have actually started programs focusing on creators in newsletter, podcast, or this creative economy.
right.
And we have not mentioned startup programs, but actually you have a lot in France and Paris region focusing on creative industries. So what you do, guys, in Chicago, you'll have a lot of equivalent in France with different focus, more artistic center or really creative industry or the visual virtual reality. And that's a very good way to tap new ecosystem. And I guess you guys receive maybe international companies looking to tap into the US
Right.
and that go through the incubators. So in France, you have the same, and some of them are welcoming international companies, and some of them will require you to speak French. But it's a very good way to know the ecosystem. Some of them have partners with public institutions. So, one of them, for example, is working with heritage sites. So depending on, they've done something with SNCF, which is the train company in France, to highlight all their archives. And so that could be really interesting for a company working in this space to be on the lookout for these opportunities and as a way to enter in the French market. So just thinking about
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. No, that's great. I had one question about the podcasts. Because Spotify and Apple, these are international, these are global companies. Are the French community, are they accessing the podcasts through like French media players, or is it through Spotify, or are there like particular or the podcast app that that we have on our iPhones? Like, what's the access points for a lot of these podcasts?
You have different access, but of course, all the majors that you'll see in the US, we have them in France, and I don't have the number of the usage, but I could find that for you if it's of interest. Then I know there is also, Swedish distributor platform called Acast that set up in Paris 2 years ago. That was a
Mm,
new player, and so you'll see a mix. But I'm not sure I have all the answer to that.
yeah, no, I'm just always curious because obviously the podcast world is huge here, and there's lots of different people starting new podcasts, and I'm it's like the companies and the organizations that create the podcasts, and then there's the people that broadcast the podcasts.
Yeah.
And I'm always, I think it's amazing to have access to podcasts from all over the world, but I'm curious if, more localized media people can help, push out local podcasts, and it's not just, they kind of get lost in the shuffle once you get, too big, and because the algorithm will not be in your favor. So that's great. Well, Daphne, I could talk for a long time with you. I really enjoy your perspective and learning about France and the French market. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me today, to talk to us today. Everyone, I'm going to put Daphne's email and LinkedIn below. If you have any questions for her or curious about the French market, you can contact me and I can connect you. She's obviously an incredible resource and has a lot of knowledge of, the creative industries in the French market and globally. She just, is a wealth of knowledge. So thank you so much for taking the time again to hang out with me and talk, and stick around in the green room, and then we will continue the conversation. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Daniel.
Well, there you have it, everyone. That was just a great and super insightful conversation with Daphne Laura, based out of Paris. She's a creative industries expert. She's a French ecosystem expert. She understands globally where the trends are, and a lot of interesting kind of points that she touched on today. So I would definitely rewatch this and get those nuggets of knowledge. Again, my name is Daniel Crane. I am the program director for the Center for Creative Entrepreneurship, and this was our Global Industry Spotlight. Every Thursday, we talk to different organizations, entrepreneurs, businesses, and people who are building things, people who are helping people build things, and learning, more and more about, the creative industries on a global scale. We wish everyone a wonderful rest of the day. Please check in next week. We'll be talking to Harrison Jones, who works for London & Partners out of London, and we will be connecting with him about the work he is doing. And that's all, folks. Take care.